めたいと思います。じゃあ、マスター・セラにお願いします。
I'd like to start the model debate, but first and foremost, I'd like to introduce the honorable debaters. On the government side, we have Ono Mitsushi-san, Kajitani Rina-san, and Mogi Natsuki-san. On the opposition side, we have Narukami Ryo-san, Negoro Hitoha-san, and Yoshida Kotaro-san. Next, I'd like to announce the motions. The motion is, this House believes that randomly selected citizens should judge in the debate tournaments. This House believes that randomly selected citizens should judge in the debate tournaments. Without further ado, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to deliver their speech within 5 minutes. Here.
It was 2011 or 12 when I first joined HPD as a coach and as a judge. Since then, I have judged many high school debate tournaments, and I have coached a lot of students and even teachers. Do you know what's the most frequently asked question to me? Can you guess what? Am I qualified to coach my students, even though I don't have any debating experience? Am I competent to teach my students? Because debate seems very difficult. The motion is difficult. Very complex jargons and types of arguments are very perplexing. I don't think I can coach my students. That's misunderstanding. Whoever willing to coach and judge in debate tournaments should be able to do so. So, as a government, whether we win or lose in this model debate, it doesn't matter. We just want to emphasize this message that debating, especially parliamentary debating, should be as inclusive and open as possible to a wide range of individuals with different backgrounds. And that's the basic stance, and that's why we affirm the motion. So we would like to introduce several points to support this. Firstly, I'm going to talk about creating an inclusive culture. Secondly, my partner Rina is going to talk about something more interesting and better argument than mine. I don't know what she's going to talk about. Before moving on to my points, let me briefly define the motion and what we are debating. 1. Randomly selected citizens. But we of course consider reasonable level of language ability. So if you don't speak English at all, I don't think you will judge in English debate tournament, but you will judge in Japanese debate tournaments. I mean, that's the status quo. We are not perfect English speakers. We still judge in English debate tournaments. That's just fair. On second level, we're more than happy to have some sort of orientations or briefing to judges or participants. I mean, many advanced countries introduced jury system, right? The ordinary citizens judge in criminal trials, right? Criminal trials involves the invasion of fundamental human rights. If people are able to do that, they are all the more capable of doing that in debate tournaments. The level of pressure is really different. So let's move on to my point, creating an inclusive culture. By bringing ordinary citizens in debate tournaments, we can democratize the debate, making debate tournaments and debate itself more accessible, which is beneficial for everyone because we can increase the number of participants and expand the community. How is this going to happen? Two logics. One, perception. By bringing ordinary citizens in debate tournament, we can fundamentally shift the perception towards debating. If your friends, your parents, or your teachers are judging in debate tournament, what do you think? Maybe I can do it. Maybe I can try. At least it's something relevant to my life. This sense of familiarity dramatically increases the public participation and engagement. It's similar to national election. Everyone has right to vote. You already decide. Your political representative and your leader. Of course, you need to examine many difficult agenda like national security, economic policy, social welfare. But nonetheless, you cast a vote and choose your political leader already in the status quo in liberal democracy. Why not do that in debate tournaments as well? Secondly, style of debate changes if ordinary citizens judge a debate tournament. For example, debaters will speak more slowly. I mean, am I speaking too fast or slow? I don't know. But when I debate in competitive tournaments, I speak very fast. I try not to do it. But the types of motion and topic will be different. Much more familiar and simple and easy to understand kind of motions will be popular in debate tournaments rather than difficult philosophical thought experiment kind of motion. And types of arguments will be different too. Let's say this house will ban tobacco. Nobody in debate tournaments refers to unemployment and budget because that's not important in debate tournament. But in real life, unemployment and budget are one of the most important priorities and issues. It's very absurd and strange that nobody cares that sort of issues in debate tournaments. Go.
So, of course, the jury system is funded millions of dollars by the government funding. Debating tournaments, because debating is a niche activity, is often underfunded, doesn't have the ability to do briefing or attract as many people. So this just ends up in a situation where like a random grandpa is invited to judge a tournament. You get demotivated to debate further because you get misjudged.
That's opposite. By bringing ordinary people into debate tournaments, we can collectively raise political awareness towards debate activity itself. Just like the Olympic Games, right? The reason why baseball, basketball has mass adoption is because a lot of people join the practices and have interest in funding and supporting that kind of activities. That similar kind of phenomenon is very likely to happen on our side of the house. We're very happy to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. Now I'd like to call upon the Leader of the Opposition to give their speech within 5 minutes. You have the floor. Here.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Debating should not be a game of persuasion for an average person, but it should be a heated battle with robust logical explanation. If you want to listen to beautiful speeches, just go to public speaking competitions, not debate. Propositions world is one where stylistic debaters that sounds better to an average citizens like Donald Trump gets elected. But our side is the one where logic triumphs and the unique beauty of debating is protected. We're very proud to oppose. Before I move on to my 2 arguments, number 1 about lower quality judging, secondly about reduced learning opportunities for debaters, 2 extraneous rebuttals. First of all, they say that everyone should be included in judgment, and they offer this principal argument. Well, we're not exactly banning anybody from being a judge, right? So I don't know what the extent of this principle does to the debate. But secondly, they say things like Olympic Games, right? People are going to be interested in debate now. But Olympic Games are national competition with billions of people watching. Debate competitions, there's only like tens of them every year, and there's only very little people that judge, right? So the scope of their impact is extremely narrow. With that, I move on to my first argument about lower quality judging. So good quality judging is where debaters are able to understand why they lost a debate through logical explanations. And average citizens are unlikely to be good judges for 2 reasons. Firstly, because they have zero incentive to actually judge fairly, right? The reason why judges in the status quo judge fairly is because they care about their reputation within the debate community, and they also really like logic because they're debaters themselves. We think that for the 99% of the population, with no particular interest in debating, they likely don't care about their reputation because the debate community is not exactly proximate to them. Therefore, they are unlikely to just, judge based on logic. They're likely to jump to things like intuitions. But the second mechanism, even if they do have the incentive to judge fairly, they don't have the capacity to judge fairly unless you are experienced. You need experience to even understand half of what the debate is about. Like Kotaro said, can an average grandpa understand your speech at this tournament? I don't think so. This is because most debaters can't make a complete argument without any errors. Think about it. How many of you here are able to make a complete argument without any logical leaps? I think they're very close to none. Therefore, oftentimes, judges have to read between the lines to infer what the argument is about and where it's trying to go so that they can follow the debate. So you need experience to be able to do that. They say criminal judgment, but this is not analogous, because in criminal judgment, there's professional lawyers that literally prepare like hundreds of hours to deliver a complete statement. Therefore, this is not analogous. The implication of all of this is that citizen judges are likely to not be able to judge logically, and instead, they will jump to what's more natural and easier, such as voting for the team with better rhetoric, or better English in good style, or voting for the side that they personally believe in outside of debating. Before I move on, sure.
So what do you assume is a more logical debate that you're going to be seeing in your paradigm?
So the debates that we see now, that judges are giving logical explanations for why one side wins, like they explain like probability of arguments, magnitude, etc. Okay, what is the impact of this argument? Twofold. First of all, this is going to lead to things like minority exclusion. When you focus less on logic, arbitrary factors like rhetoric or even color of skin and actual visual appearances become more important to the win. Therefore, as a result of this policy, people who do not speak English fluently, people of color, or people who are not conventionally attractive are more likely to lose, and the debate community will become more homogenous. This actually flips the entirety of the case because your entire case is about inclusion. Therefore, we won this debate in terms of this impact. But the second impact is that even outside of the minority, there's going to be discontent from debaters. When you trained for all of your high school to win at HBDU and got some illogical judgment and you lost and you don't know the reason why, you're going to be frustrated and you're going to want to opt out. We protect this from happening. And the reason why this is important is because the foundation of all debate competitions are passionate debaters who love debate. The organizers here today are working tirelessly to make the experience special for us because they enjoy debate themselves. The debaters here have practiced so hard because they enjoy debating. We do not want to take the fun out of debating, and that is why this argument is important. The second argument then, why this decreases learning opportunities for debaters. And there are three mechanisms as to why this is the case. First of all, the motions offered at the competitions are likely to be less political. Right now, we're able to debate like communism versus capitalism because most debaters are liberals who are highly educated. However, when you get people like average citizens, it's very likely that they're going to be frustrated or feel uncomfortable in these debates because they're left-sided or right-sided, etc. Therefore, the organizers will likely err on the side of caution and not do political motions. But secondly, as they say, the motions offered at competitions are going to be less challenging. And the reason why this is problematic is because challenging motions have educational value as well. Learning about Somaliland's independence, for example, really help you understand the situation in Africa. Therefore, we think that this is bad. Third, quality of judge feedbacks are going to be lower because they do not have previous debate experiences. For all of those reasons, we think that the educational function of debate competitions are going to be lowered on their side of the house. Therefore, we win the debate.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for their speech. Now I'd like to call upon a member of government to give their speech within 5 minutes. Member of government, you have the floor. Here's your.
I'm going to start by responding to the other side's arguments. They say that because a lot of average citizens do not understand logic and that the average grandpa cannot understand English debate, everything will become unfair and it will be an unhappy experience for many high schoolers. I want to first point out that they assume that their world is completely logical, but they themselves also say that nobody in this room can make a completely logical argument. If that is the case, on either side of the house, people would be biased, people would be illogical. The issue is, in what manner are we illogical, right? Because I think the way we perceive what constitutes a logical, smart argument in debate is very, very seclusive and it's only understandable to people who are well educated and who understand the niche jargons about debate, about what a status quo is, about what logically prior is, about what impacts are. These are all terms that might seem like important logical aspects to the average debater, but it's something that is probably meaningless to the rest of the world. So if we are going to be prioritizing the kind of logic that they are talking about, I don't think it's going to be an educational experience at the end of the day. I think on our side of the house, people are going to be following logic that is more catered to the masses. So it might be more simplistic, it might be more rhetorical, but at least through the experience of going through a debate tournament, you as a student are able to learn how to properly communicate with people in society. At best, the rhetoric that we learn in this room are only going to be usable to other debaters or people in consulting firms, for example, no shade. But I think at least if we open debate to a wider number of people, we learn to communicate with a wider number of people. And if education is what they care about, I think we achieve that much better on our side of the house. But the second thing is, they say that if somebody misjudges you because of their poor logic, you would feel unhappy and you would quit. But I want to point out that I think many people already feel like they want to quit because of being misjudged literally right now. And what I mean by this is, I think a lot of people in debate feel that they are not represented well. If you think about it, you need to, first of all, be in a very, highly reputable high school or university to even participate in a debate tournament. So that already excludes half of the population, because remember, not everybody can go to high school or go to university and to even have a good English class that allows them to be on this stage, right? So if that is the case, I think, but second of all, judges are even more seclusive, because if you think about it, well, in high school tournaments, it's probably your teachers or people who've debated in the past. If you go to university, things become even more shady, because you're going to be judging your best friend, maybe, or you're going to be judging someone who you know is a strong debater, who you know is from a famous institution. These are all notions that come behind your head as you judge, which can cloud your judgment, which can make you believe that one side is more persuasive than the other. And I think this then means that there's going to be far more unfair results on their side of the house, right? And if you know that, for example, this debater is going to come at me and attack my judgment and my decision making, it's just not worth it to give them the loss, maybe. These are all thoughts that can go through any judge's mind, because judges are obviously human and they also care about their reputation, for example, as they themselves also concede, right? On our side of the house, at least, things are randomized. You pick people out of the population, so it's unlikely that you're going to be the only girl in the room, or you're going to be the only Asian in the room, and that happens a lot in debate, because right now it's only open to certain people. But on our side, at least the judges reflect the general population, because statistically speaking, it's very hard to randomly pick 10 white men for them to judge in a room, right? So I think on our side of the house, you at least get fairer judgment, because many people get a loss right now in debate because they feel like the judges believe that your experiences are extreme, or that your experiences are illogical, when in reality, for example, if you're a poor student from a rural region, and you talk about your experiences, the judges, who tend to be well educated, believe that your case is extreme. But on our side of the house, when there are more people like you who are judging the room, that's when your stories are finally seen as a logical experience, or finally seen as a convincing case. I think this is far better for more vulnerable people to be represented in discourse, first of all, but also as an educational experience, because when you come from a certain university or from a certain high school, you're only surrounded by your peers, and you're only surrounded by people you know in the judging pool. It's very hard for you to expand your worldview. So I think on our side of the house, we get a much more inclusive and educational experience from debate. Very proud to propose.
Thank you, Member of Government, for their speech. Now I'd like to call upon a member of opposition to give their speech within 5 minutes. You have the floor. Here.
lowering the quality of debate tournaments for the sake of staying relevant in real-life world. We must protect the unique learning and enjoyment of our fellow debaters and coaches. Therefore, we're very proud to oppose this motion. So 3 things I'm going to be doing in my speech. First, reconstruction of our LO. Secondly, refutation against their first speaker. And lastly, expanding on our second argument about how the quality of debate competition is going to be lower. So first on the reconstruction, right? They talked about how people will be logical on our side as well because judges are also human. Let me expand on our paradigm and explain to you how exactly this is not going to happen. Okay, trained judges might not be able to make the perfect logical arguments, but they know what makes a good argument. They know what burdens are, they know what weighing mechanisms are, and they know the logical structures and class, right? They know what is necessary to make an argument stand, and this expertise ensures that the best ideas win, not just the best delivery. You can see that judging is not going to be perfect in a day. You learn your skills, your judging skills over 2-3 years. I learned a lot from judging my Shiba co-highs, for example, and through these practices, I learned how to judge more logically and holistically, right? We think that on our side of the house, these trained judges aren't going to be much better for the debaters as well because they're going to be getting better comments. Now, second part of my argument on the first speaker of their speech. They talked about how they can create an inclusive environment, right? But 3 things here. First, we don't see much of a problem in the status quo to begin with, right? There's things like presidential debates, there's things like news, and people, citizens have their own conversations. We debaters have our own special conversations. We think this is what makes our environment so unique and fun to be in, right? But secondly, we think we can disseminate debate through debate workshops instead of dragging unmotivated office workers to make an instinctive decision on the spot, right? Which is expensive as well because we have to pay for all of their hotel fees and their transportation fees, right? Notice that not everyone is fit for debate, right? Many of us don't enjoy listening to people talk about the political and socio-economic state of the world. Notice that the MBTI, I don't know how many of you guys believe in it, but there's 16 personality traits in MBTI, and only one of them is debating. You can see how all of the 15 other personality traits are not debaters, right? Everyone has what they want to do. We think we should let them do that instead of dragging them to debate tournaments which they don't understand well. So thirdly, on our second argument about how the quality of debate competition is going to become lower, I'm going to expound on how judge feedback quality will become lower and then explain our impacts, right? How will judge feedback quality become lower? We think this is very detrimental to debaters, right? Because feedback from a neutral professional is the most important thing in a debate. You get strategic feedback. How can we make our arguments better? You ask that to judges and they reply, right? On the other hand, on their side of the house, you're going to ask them and they're going to say, oh, you should have said this statement because I personally agree with it. Because that's the only way they're able to resonate with the motion because they don't have any skills, right? We think that in many times, our coaches or friends, they also look at our debates, but they're not going to be as serious as the judges because that's not their burden. We think that it is very special when these judges give us this strategic feedback. This is what makes debates so fun and something that we can continue on for so long, right? Debate is used in many cases and has many purposes, but tournaments are mostly for students and people who are willing to up their debate skills, right? Let's analyze what debate tournaments are. They are there to first educate people, right? This means logical and neutral feedback from a professional, but when they're pointed the burden to observe these debaters. Notice this includes illustrations and characterizations and rhetoric as well, things that they want to protect. But on our side, we're also able to protect other things like counterfactuals and impact and logic and things like this, right? So they're much more capable to look at the whole of debate holistically, right? If looking at how convincing people was gone in the debate world, there wouldn't be any compliments about rhetoric or about quality of language. We still have that on our side of the house. We think this is why it is so special, right? Lastly, on the impacts of our second argument, we're going to have less special discourse, things that are unique to debate on their side of the house, because even if political situation about Bangladesh isn't important to all parts of the world, it is important to us debaters, and it is special that we discuss about it, we don't ignore it, and we raise the quality of debates as we go down through generations, right? But secondly, we'll get less debaters on our side of the house. up and making these decisions. For all of these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Thank you, member of opposition, for their speech. Now I'd like to call upon Government Whip to give their speech within 5 minutes. Here.
Opposition says that in status quo, judges know more about the arguments in debating. But we think that this precisely is the problem in the status quo. Because the problem that we have outlined from the status quo in first is really simple, which is to say, we think debating in status quo is that it is really too theoretical, and that people currently speak too fast because it works for them. And that I think that in debating community, judges are never an average reasonable person, and that we want to close the gap on our side of the house. I want to chat about two themes in my speech. Firstly, on the educational function of debating, and secondly, on how we increase the number of individuals that opt into the debating community. Firstly then, let's talk about the educational function of debating. Our claim here was simple, that we're going to literally change the incentive of the debaters who are within the debating community, because as they have said, debaters obviously would want to win the debating competition, and if it was you guys that would judge it, I think we would obviously change the way we speak, which is a reason why I think in this model debate, everyone is speaking slow, everyone is not speaking like those debaters in like the online debating competition that we see in the debating video right now. The first argument that they throw in this debate is to say that individuals would obviously receive worse feedback. I would flip this and tell you that this is actually better on our side, because note that whether or not the feedback that you get is better or worse is really subjective. And the claim that we throw from our first speaker is to say, sure, maybe that individuals would get better feedback on their side in terms of winning the argumentation in the debating community. The types of feedback that you're likely able to get on our side of the house is far more practical, in that you're more likely to, value things like intuition, value things that are actually going to work out in society. Because note, all of the arguments that you see in the controversial debating, which they say is educational somehow, is something that you'll never use in real life to begin with. Because leader of the opposition themselves concede that you learn things about, let's say, Somaliland and independence. How are you going to actually use that in your real life? It's about how, for instance, how animal rights are somehow more important than human rights, or it's about how we must topple the current society, and how we must support Marxist revolution, which was the motion of the 2016 grand finals in Worlds. All of which is literally impractical, which is something that we change in our side of the house. So if anything, if they wanted to care about the educational value of the debating community, we think this would likely increase in our side of the house. Second question, let's talk about the inclusive environment of the debating community. What we tell you from first is that we create perceptual change because your friends and your families are also going to join the debating community, and that we change the styles of debating and such. Their first claim is that arbitrary factors likely hurt the minorities. Aside from the fact that we flip this in second, in that biases presumably exist on both sides of the house, regardless of you being a debater or not, the fact is, on our side, insofar as we have randomly selected citizens, we are much more likely to minimize the bias because you are randomly chosen. But the second thing I want to point out is that I think equity violation system presumably exists on both sides of the house. And I want to point out that there are, hate speech laws that exist, so presumably, intuitively speaking, this is still logical and wouldn't change on either side, meaning that the worst forms of harm is presumably unlikely to happen on both sides of the house. So, the second claim they make is to say, but you have now workshops and are alternative means to, spread the value of debating, and therefore you get the impact on their side. Obviously, this is not standing. Why? Because if the activity itself does not change, presumably, it wouldn't disseminate in society, right? Because obviously, even if you have workshops, what are you going to do? Are you going to look at someone speaking at like 50 words per minute? Or I don't know what they're talking about. Which is the reason why I think you cannot have that workshop to actually gain all of our massive benefits in our side of the house. Before I move on to the weighing, I'll take a POI.
So the biases of an average person is not just racial or against minority, but it's also political. Like if a right-wing person sits in front of you and then you're trying to convince that allowing abortion is a good thing, you can never convince them to do that.
Okay, so I think firstly, it's quite offensive for you to say that what an average individual has and its bias is a bad thing. If that was something that we currently have, then I think that is a logical thing to do. I think you yourself never explain what logic actually is. But the second thing I want to point out is that the debating community, as of the status quo, is biased to begin with. It's increasingly left, which is a reason why I think we must also value right-wing ideas as well. On weighing, why is inclusivity the most important metric of the debate? There are two reasons. The first thing I want to point out is that even if there's 3% decrease in the educational quality on our side, I think debating on both sides of the house is educational to an extent, right? Because let's be reasonable. Even if you get less leftist ideas on our side, you are more likely to gain things like knowledge on our side as well. Meaning that if we increase the exposure, and if more of the individuals join the debating community on our side of the house and do the debating activity, that is in and of itself a benefit. But secondly, they themselves can see that debating is good, but on our side we increase funding because we increase support and we increase popularity for the movement, activity as a whole, which is the reason why we think that in order for them to actually get the benefit, our side is prerequisite.
Thank you, Governor Wood, for their speech. Now I'd like to call upon opposition whip to give their speech within 5 minutes. Hear.
So I'm going to make this speech super clear. So I'm only going to talk about two things. The first one is, will debating competition be fun anymore? And second thing is, will debating competition be inclusive? And the reason why I'm asking whether debating will be fun or not is that this is the most important thing in this debate. Because even if debate becomes more inclusive on government bench, if it's not fun anymore, you might as well quit. The second thing is, tournaments are often, just like this tournament, run on voluntary basis. You know who holds this tournament? It is a bunch of passionate English teachers who love debating, who spends and sacrifices their time without any compensation to host this tournament. And this is only possible if debating is fun, thus have some passionate people in it. So, will debating be fun anymore? The government will, on their side, pick a random person in straight, just gives out a letter and then says, well, this weekend you have to come to this place, you have to debate and judge this particular competition. And then a random citizen is going to be literally forced to sit in a room and listen to 60 minutes of nerds spitting and speaking at them. And then if you make the wrong judgment, they will face angry debaters coming up to you, tweeting bad things about you. Obviously, it's not a fun thing. But also, I just want to note that if an average person, right, like randomly selected person, is not certainly interested that much and invested into politics. So if they have to listen to 60 minutes of private equity funds, merger and acquisition deals, for instance, or how Japan's future is just on the crisis, or whatever the political and geopolitical situation might be, these are incredibly boring topics to the vast majority of people. So people will sleep in the mid-round. So just think about it. Go into a competition. You do lots of practice. You work hard for competition, only to see a judge sleeping in front of you in your speech. Obviously, that is incredibly demotivating. And they're saying, you're going to have briefing. But how can you control the behavior of a random person, especially when we are talking about debating tournaments with very little funding, and how can you indoctrinate them to like politics or like debating? Like, debating is a fundamentally nerdy activity. I'm sorry, it cannot be the mainstream topic, right? It cannot be as popular as football, and it is absurd that these guys want that situation to happen. So, in that scenario, what happens? The judge is a horrible quality, and you work hard to become a good debater, but you get so demotivated during the competition. And biases are often Japanese debater. So obviously in that scenario, the bias becomes worse. But obviously, the bias is not just racial, but it's also political, right? If the randomly selected citizen happens to be an extreme right-wing person, then if you are debating on the left-wing side, you are screwed. There is no way for you to save you from winning in just a span of 24-minute speech. So it is impossible for you to win. So debating tournament just becomes a lottery of who you get as a judge. So this is a scenario where debate becomes no longer fun anymore.
So your point suggests that the workshops don't work, and that the existence of the angry debaters has meant that the average individuals would obviously have an incentive to judge in a good manner.
Look, what workshop will prevent you from listening to 60 minutes of boring, nerdy conversations? I would sleep during the classes and sleep during lectures. Like, that's biological. You cannot change the workshop. Okay. The government criticism against us is that, well, debating, people speak too fast and too theoretical. That's bad. But that's not how debating looks like right now. Some of the best debaters in the world right now are not theoretical or don't speak too fast. And the reason is simple. If I speak like, there's 5 structural reasons why something's going to happen, obviously it's not convincing. The judge will not be willing to buy you. The speaking slower is sometimes a good thing because you can condense more information. You can condense that information to be more of the significance. You can try to instill that point that you're making into the judge's memory far more. But also, if I tell you that Japan will have more population in 10 years because of 5 structural reasons, and then go on to explain logical reasons why, you would not believe me because it is just simply unintuitive. Intuition is some of the key elements of debating still under the status quo. So it is absurd to say that people are too theoretical or people do speak too fast. Finally, briefly on inclusion. I think that Mitsu-san misses the point. Because when they say inclusion, they don't say inclusion in what sense. And the only explanation is that you now become inclusive of beginners. But this has nothing to do with judges. This has things to do with environment. And I would know the debating community, personally, is one of the most welcoming environments. If you come as a beginner and ask random senior, can you teach me about debating? Can you watch my speech? Most certainly they would say, yes, I would be willing to help you out. So that has nothing to do with the quality of judges. So if you are suddenly not a randomly selected citizen, you are an experienced judge, you know which side to vote for. Very proud to stand in opposition.
Thank you, opposition, for their speech. Now I'd like to call upon opposition replies to give their speech within 4 minutes. Here.
To do anything fairly, you need a format and a good understanding of that format. For example, if you want to play soccer fairly, you would not use your hands, right? Our argument was that to debate fairly and learn from this experience, you need a good understanding of the debate format. They misunderstood this argument. With that, I'm going to forward 2 comparatives. First, on which is better for the fairness of judgment in debate competitions. Secondly, on which side is more educational. But before that, let's just recap some arguments that became irrelevant in the debate. 2 arguments. First of all, on their equality principle that their first brings up. We already told you from our first speaker that we're not exactly excluding everybody, so therefore this principle doesn't stand, or is not important in the debate. But secondly, their point on raising awareness, like Olympics. But we already told you that the scope of the event itself is not analogous, and that's why this point doesn't stand. Moreover, we told you 2 things. From Hitoha, we told you that if we're able to actually pay those citizen judges, we can just use the same financial resources to do things like debate courses, right? That are more higher in quality. But secondly, our whip already told you that most average citizens are unable to learn from these events or are unable to have an interest in debate to begin with. So therefore, we were able to respond to this argument, and their arguments are kicked out. With that, let's talk about which side is better for the fairness of judgment. Their sole argument here is that their side is able to reflect the real world. Well, let's look at the real world for a second. Is the real world actually fair, right? You see politicians elected because they sound better, right? You see black activists not having a voice because they have color. You see 90% of politicians are males globally. The real world is not fair, and if they believe that the representation of the real world is what gets justice, they're flawed in this debate. We told you that debate is a utopia where logic triumphs over all of these biases. But sure, bias might exist on either side. But our argument was that even if bias exists on either side, it is not symmetric. Our argument was that we're able to defend those biases by being able to have a logical feedback and a logical RFD. And we told you two comparative mechanisms as to why our judges are likely to be less biased than theirs, and their side gives no response. Therefore, we think that our side is more fair. The importance of all of this argument is that debaters are going to be less passionate on their side of the house because debaters are unable to get justified wins, so therefore all their efforts seem like they're not paid off. We told you that this is important because to have a debate competition to begin with, you need a set of the debate community that is really passionate about debating, right? The organizers here, we told you from Wim's argument that the organizers are spending countless hours for free in order to make this competition special. We think that therefore, this argument was very important because to have a debate competition, which is the basis of this motion to begin with, you need debaters who are passionate. I'm going to secondly talk about educational value. And we told you that judge feedback is going to be better on our side of the house because they have previous debate experiences. They say that they're able to teach real-world skills like rhetoric, but we're not clear why you need to get that specifically from debate competitions, right? If you want that, you can just get it from public speaking competitions and such. Therefore, we don't think this point is relevant. But we also told you that we will be able to have a more diverse set of motions, right? They concede to this. They say that on their side of the house, the motions that they're able to offer is going to be limited because the average citizen cannot understand about the independence of Somaliland. What we tell you is that arguments about things like Somaliland actually helped me internalize the problems in Africa, and it helped me be more aware of what's happening around the world, which is a very real-world skill that is very important in any debate. Therefore, we think that their arguments just do not really clash or do not engage to what we were trying to offer, and our arguments really prove the importance of all of our arguments and the educational aspect of debate that all of you guys are here for. Therefore, we win the debate.
Thank you, opposition reply, for their speech. I'd like to call upon government reply to give their speech within 4 minutes. Here.
Thank you. I'm sure you have this experience. If you talk about debate, people automatically think, oh, it's rompa, it's quarrel, it's fighting, right? People automatically reject you. I have experienced that so many times. You know what? There is a strong stigma attached to debating. People don't just even try to understand debate, right? That's just our reality. That's what we like to change. The only solution is to create engagement between debate community and general public. That is why we have already won this debate. But in order to strengthen our victory, we would like to answer 3 questions. Firstly, who's benefiting at whose expense? Secondly, what's important in the long term? Thirdly, what's unique about randomization? First of all, who's benefiting at whose expense? We are more than happy to accept almost all the harms explained by the side of the house. Low quality judging, bias, some debate freaks will be unsatisfied. Sure, that's likely to happen. We don't deny that. But that's very short-term harm. That's transitory aspect of our policy. We are talking about 50 years later. I mean, 50 years later, when debate is normalized and normal activity, people will be able to logically examine arguments to a reasonable degree. I mean, people are irrational, people have bias. That's true in the status quo. But that's the story of the status quo. We are talking about a different scenario in which debate will be more publicly participated. So maybe right now, I mean, the HPDU is held in this Olympic Center. I hope in 50 years later, we will use Budokan to hold this HPDU. That's wonderful, right? I mean, next to Shohei Ohtani or Naoya Inoue, will appear from HPDU membership, maybe, right? That's the kind of world we would like to create. So we are more than happy to pay a trade-off of limited number, I mean, less than 1% of population of like debate freaks being unsatisfied kind of stuff. Secondly, what's important in the long term? As I said before, I mean, people are biased, people are irrational, people don't really rationally judge debate tournament. Right, that's very short-term harm, right? I mean, long time ago, slavery didn't have right to vote. Women didn't have right to vote. Because at the time, people believed that certain demography and certain types of individuals didn't have ability to rationally judge the candidates. But nowadays, everyone has a right to vote because casting a vote is normalized in a democracy, and everyone has a reasonable degree of literacy to understand what candidates are talking about. That is why liberal democracy exists to begin with. If you deny the possibility of random citizens or average reasonable citizens to examine agenda rationally, then you are denying democracy as a whole. You are denying the possibility of debating as a whole, and why are you debating in the first place? So in the long term, I think many of the harms will be mitigatory. At least very minor problem. We're more than happy to pay that cost for long-term awareness of debate itself and public education. Finally, what's unique in randomization? I mean, biased adjudication. That happens anyway in both paradigms. Because professional judges are also biased. They value certain types of arguments, like principle justification, the weighing, right? The kinds of arguments that top debaters used in the past that they watched on YouTube. Those are the kind of arguments that are unfairly valued right now. But there are some arguments that are underrepresented right now. But my partner explained that good things about randomization is that we can present better diversity in adjudicator pools. Therefore, in kinds of bias prejudice that we are talking about is different. We would like to bring more neutral perspectives to even to debate communities. So finally, I sincerely believe that you are enjoying this HPD tournament, and someday you will leverage your debating skills to make your dream come true. And in order to do that, let's engage with the debate community. Let's invite your friends or parents and teachers to HPD tournament. We are happy to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, government reply, for their speech. Before ending this model debate, let's give a round of applause to all the debaters who took their time. Okay. Have you decided the votes? Yes? Okay. Please raise your hands if you think the government won. Please lower your hands. Next, please raise your hands if you think the opposition won. The winner is the opposition side. Lastly, please give one more round of applause to all the debaters.
解説をしろと言われたので何も準備していないんですけれども、おこがましいのですが、解説をさせていただきます。これは去年の連盟杯の決勝のモーションということで、多分ですね、ここにいるみんな6人ともおそらく普通のそのディベートのラウンドで話すのと、モデルディベートで話すのは、ちょっと内容が違うと思っていて、一応ね、ランダムにセレクティッドシティズンとプロフェッショナルジャッジのランダムにセレクティッドシティズン側にも分かりやすいようなスピーチをモデルディベートっていうのはした方が受けはいいと思うので、みんなノートとかも取ってる人ばっかりじゃないですし、できるだけ記憶に残りやすい1つ2つみたいなことを指していくみたいな感じの、スピーチをしている場合が多いのかなとは、思います。ただですね、これは実際の普通のディベートでもすごい大事でですね、ジャッジもちろんノート取ってるんですけど、別に人間なのでね、結局60分聞いてたら途中でアテンションが下がることもあるし、 その全部をちゃんとオーガナイズして全てなんかこの13個これを言っててこれとこれがこういうふうに絡まっててってリンクを結ぶっていうことは僕も無理ですし、結構ほとんどの人は無理だと思うので、やっぱり分かりやすさっていうのはすごい重要な、要素かなというふうに思います。なので、これを私たちはしたいんです。例えば、オポジションだったらディベートファンの方がいいんですみたいな感じでこれ提示してあげて、こういうふうに勝ちますよと、このクラッシュ勝ったら他のクラッシュよりこっちの方が大事だから勝てますよみたいな感じで、分かりやすいスピーチっていうのを目指していただきたいなと思います。で、僕が思うのは結構ゴールから逆算して考えるっていうスピーチの仕方をしてほしくて、特に後半の人はですね、どういうことかっていうと、最初のスピーチの1分くらいはですね、メタコメントっていうんですけど、自分がこれから何をするか全て注力を、増します。なので自分たちはこういうふうに勝ちたいんだっていうそのゴールのまでのその路線をですね、ジャッジに提示してあげるということが大事です。今これとこれとこれのクラッシュがあって、このクラッシュが一番大事なんで、このクラッシュを勝ったら私たちは勝ちますよ。じゃあこのクラッシュの話をしましょう。で、仮にこのクラッシュ負けてたとしても、even if このクラッシュ負けてたとしても、次のクラッシュで勝てば私たち勝てますよ。じゃあ次のクラッシュの話しましょうっていう感じで、どうやったら自分たちは勝てるんですかっていうそのゴールの意識を持ってスピーチしてもらえるとすごい効率的で重要なことばっかり、スピーチになるというふうに、思います。はい。内容についてははい、こんな感じなので、聞いてもらったものを参考にしてもらえればいいかなというふうに思います。はい。ということで、皆さん頑張ってください。
はい、では、もう一回モデルディベートの方で拍手でお願いします。ありがとうございました。はい、この試合の動画に関しましては、後日 HPTU の YouTube チャンネルにて